I'd like to welcome you to the next video in the IMSAI 8080 CP-A build series. This is the Rev 4 PCB. In this video, we're going to install all the disc capacitors. So let's fire up our soldering pencils and dive in.
Well, with all the logic soldered in, we've worked through that section of the installation diagram. Now we move into the capacitors here. And I'm going to change order here again just a little bit, just because I know these three capacitors are special and they need to be in the right positions, and I believe it's just easier to do these three first. We put the diode back in the bag. We'll come around to it in a minute. So I'm going to jump down to step 24. Insert and solder each of the 0.001 microfarad disc caps. I'm sure that's these little tiny guys. Yeah, 102, and this is going to be either 0.01 or 103. So these tiny ones in this case are the 0.001. At locations C3 and C8. I will highlight these for you here. C3 is right here, and C8 is right here. And as it says here in the label, C3 is a 0.001. So it would be very easy to get the wrong cap in place. And I can speak from experience when I say if you get 0.1 microfarad caps in these locations, it does not work. See if I can bend this guy enough to actually get him to fit down in there. I'm just fitting the leads so I get a somewhat nice looking installation. That went in pretty well. I'm happy with that. Go ahead and solder him. That takes care of C3. We've got another one at location C8, which is over here. In this case, I'm just going to use the pliers here to bend these very close together leads to a little more appropriate. Well, if I can get the tool to actually not keep rotating the part around, so I think it's a little more appropriate to the pads on the board. Again, feel free to insert it however you normally insert. This is just what I prefer to do. C3 is here between U13 and U14. Above them there happens to be these two pads right here. I'm going to solder that one. And then we've got a single 0.01 microfarad capacitor at C4. C4 happens to be right here. And that is this capacitor here. And again, the leads are awfully close together for the needs on the board here, so I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. I'm going to bend these out just so I'm a little bit happier with how it mounts. That's just my preference. And I think that'll mount a little bit better in there. It might actually be a little bit too wide. No, it went in just fine. And of course, with these poking up like this, I'm going to bend the heck out of them as I'm handling the board here. That's just reality. So let me get these trimmed off. And then I'll talk about some of what the instructions say here. So those three are in place. That takes care of this step 25 and 24. That guy's actually sitting awfully high. So it says here to actually mount the capacitors in a way that they can be folded over. And that's because you've got to be able to make room. The plastic Red filter almost touches the LEDs. Nothing can be higher on the board than those LEDs, and that capacitor would have been higher. That one's okay, that one's okay. When we look at an original board, like this one, you can see the physical size of the capacitors here and how they're bent over to make room. So there's commentary here about making room, especially between C1, C2, etc., etc. C2, C3, C5s that should be laid down. Capacitors that come with the kit here are not nearly physically as large as the original caps were. So you don't need to worry so much. Those original caps were at least twice as tall as these, if not taller. Let me dig all the stuff out of here that we're not going to be using at the moment. If I can pick the screw up, the nut, there should be one more tantalum floating in there. So we don't need to worry about this. These caps are much smaller than those originals were. If you happen to have very large caps in your kit, make sure to heat this so they can be bent over, and that way that front plastic won't press up against the caps. And so really this just becomes a matter of locating all of the capacitors on the board. Like it says, it's C12, blah, 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 through 22. There's a number of them on here. I know a lot of the locations by heart. There are 4 of them in here. 1, 2, 3, 4. And I'm just going to go ahead and insert these as best I can. I'm not going to worry about bending the leads. They're not going to be perfect. That's fine. These leads, as compared to the ones we just did, are much wider. But I do need to get it down somewhat flush to the board. It can't be too proud of the board. At the same time, I want it kind of square. These are never going to be perfect. And again, there was all kinds of capacitors as IMSAI went through its lifetime that were used just depending on what they were able to buy, what they had, etc. And so none of their pads were ever perfectly sized for the capacitors that they were using. That's just reality. We'll pick up 3 of them here, and there's one more that'll go in down here in a minute. We'll get these 3 in first. I did these 3 to start because there's 2 of them that are very close together there that would be difficult to solder if they were both on the board. Go ahead and trim those leads. There's one more up here. It sits back in behind here, and I'm actually going to spin him. So in this case, the markings face outward on the back side. So both those capacitors can be read without removing them. And that's just something I like to do, is if I can, mount the part so that you can read the markings on it after it's soldered in. Again, it just makes for a little nicer, maybe you could say a little more professional build. It's just an aid in the future. If somebody ever has to service this and they're wondering what that cap is, they'll be able to just read it. So we pick up 4 of them over there. We pick up, there's one down here. You know, if I could hold on to the board, it would help. There's one down here. There's actually a position on the board here that you would think would be for a capacitor. It's laid out for one, but it was never called out. It was never defined in their documentation. Again, it's on the original board. That's what's left on this board. You know, that's just how it is. Whether that was just a miss in the documentation they never corrected, I don't know. There's one there. We come way across. There's one here. All of these capacitors have the pads are larger. They're the pads form are more the size of the pads for the ICs versus the little pass-through pads, all the vias on the board. So they do stand out a bit once you learn to recognize them. It makes it a little bit easier, like I say, to see where to put the caps in place. There's one up here. Again, I'm putting markings on the capacitors, in this case facing to my left, just so it's easier to read when looking at the board. There's one up here. I think every time I've done this, there's always been one last one that I just struggle to find. There is one. I don't know why I didn't get this one a minute ago. I walked right past it. There's one here. And I think that's enough right now. So I should just go ahead and solder. All these 0.1s are decoupling capacitors that we're doing now. They're on the 5-volt power rail, and they just help smooth that power rail out as the logic chips here, transition from 0 to 1s, 1s to 0s, from highs to low and low to high. They demand current to do it, and having a local source of stored current just helps keep the power supplies quieter. So that's why they're here. You'll often see, if you look at like a modern PC on the back side of the CPU, there'll be a whole sea of little surface mount despiking caps. And again, it's just for providing short bursts of available current when the switching on the IC demands it. And it helps with what's called noise immunity, makes the system a little more stable. Couldn't see that lead to get it trimmed. Well, I got a whole lot of caps left, and at the moment, no idea where they go. See, so we've got this one. We've got this one, this one, this one, this one, and this one. There's one there. So there's 3 along here. I'm going to do the 2 on the opposite sides first, and then I'll do the one in between them second. That way the leads aren't interfering with each other when I solder on the back side of the board. I'm just getting trimmed component leads everywhere. There's one here that goes in between those 2. And again, these aren't imperfect. They're not perfectly square. They never are. It's one of those things, I like them to look nice, but they don't need to be perfect. It's a hand-assembled board. It's not a machine-assembled board. 3 more. So we've just hit this one, and this one. We have one right there. Get the leads flared out so I can get it soldered in here. Hopefully to get it to lock down into place there. We have one. We've already just set that one in place. We've already soldered in this one. We have one right here. Like I said, it always comes down to one with me. When I install these, it always comes down to one, and there's the one sitting there that hopefully they'll be able to figure out where it goes. And when you're building this, take a look at the original part component location diagram, and because it's difficult to work from, I can absolutely guarantee you it is difficult to work from. It's just really difficult to see. There is, oh, come on. I've already installed this one. I've already installed this one. I've already installed this one. I've gotten this one and this one. Why is there always one more than I need? Or always one that I can't locate? There it is. All the way over here. I think it always is actually that same one that I struggle with and then finally find. And we have this one in place. So that works us through each of the two, the 1, the 0.1s, insert and solder the 233 microfarad 25 volt tantalums at locations C9 and C10. Tantalums are here with the power supply components. Tantalums are polarized. There's usually some kind of an indication on the package. The ones you've got most likely have a little tiny plus symbol. The longer lead is the plus lead, in this case on these. The pluses are called out here on the assembly diagram. There's also little pluses in the foil on the board. I think these are short enough that they can just be stood up square. And let me explain what I'm looking at here. If you can see up underneath here, there's 2 blue tantalums on this original board, and they're laid over on their sides because they're so tall. Tall enough they would have touched the inside of the switches here. The question becomes, with these directly on the board, do I need to be able to fold these over? I think I'm going to go ahead and actually mount them so they can be folded over. Again, I'm going to do a bit of lead forming here. You don't necessarily have to do this. But I am going to mount it with enough height that it can be bent over forward once the rest of the components are in place. And I'm going to tack solder it in from this side of the board just to hold it in place. I'm going to take the other one and I'm going to do the same thing with the plus lead on it. I'm going to bend it out and down. And it's going to go over on this side. Again, I'm going to leave enough height. You can see about how much height I've left here on those. That way they can be folded over. once I've got the voltage regulator in place. So they're tucked out of the way. They look like they're very close to the same height. We will be addressing the voltage regulator here in a moment, but we're going to do that in a different video. So the last step in this section, discrete component installation, is step 27, is that little diode that's been floating around. So if you have an older version of the manual you're working from that you found on, say, the web, there's a lot of different versions of the manual. A lot of the original early manuals don't have this step in it. Step 27 is missing. That was added at some point. So you can get to the end of a build and think you're done, and this diode's missing. So this is on 0.5 centers again. And I'm going to hold the diode pretty well centered there. The diode has a black band on one end. That black band aligns, you probably can't see it, in the little diode that's drawn here. The cathode's marked, and the black band is marked. That black band goes down towards the bottom of the board. It is a polarized component, and it must be put in correctly. We will solder up what we've done on the back of the board here. Two tantalums sit across the incoming plus 8-volt rail and the outgoing regulated plus 5-volt rail. Just add a bit of bulk storage there, help keep things from oscillating, that kind of stuff. I just shot myself in the face. Luckily, I'm wearing glasses. So that gets us through step 27. That really does finish that section. The build's electronics, besides the switches, is almost done. We're just down to the voltage regulator, which we will pick up on in the next video.
Well, I appreciate your watching the video. A like on the video is always appreciated. Subscription to the channel if you're not a subscriber is appreciated. Comments, feedback, etc. are always appreciated. So it looks like in the next video we're going to jump in and install the voltage regulator. I hope to see you in that video.